OK, Graham, thank you for that. So, as we heard in the news, an expert legal group has been set up to review the role of the Supreme Court in Scottish criminal cases. It's chaired by the highly regarded Lord McCluskey, who retired 11 years ago. The former Solicitor General's opinions on the European Convention of Human Rights and human rights law have been controversial. He has described the Convention rights as a field day for crackpots, a pain in the neck for judges, and a goldmine for lawyers. A human rights-based appeal in which Lord McCluskey was one of the judges had to be rerun when the Lord Justice General ruled that there was the risk of a perception that Lord McCluskey was biased against human rights arguments. Referring to the apprehension of bias in newspaper articles Lord McCluskey had written, the Lord Justice General stressed the importance of the tone of the language and the impression which the author deliberately gives that his hostility to the operation of the Convention is both long-standing and deep-seated. Meanwhile, last week, Lord McCluskey said the Justice Secretary Kenny MacAskill ought to be ashamed of his comments about the ignorance of English judges in the Supreme Court. His comments of "he who plays the piper calls the tune" were egregious and unsuitable for a man holding his office, he said. He also said Lord Hope and Lord Roger were two of the best qualified judges in Scottish criminal law. There has been a great deal of insulting language, he said. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to the First Minister, Alex Salmond, and read him all these quotes. I began by asking the First Minister whether there was now a risk of a perception that Lord McCluskey might not give the Supreme Court arguments a fair hearing, given his comments on Convention rights.
Lord McCluskey is one of the finest legal minds that Scotland's ever produced. I think his character and reputation is unimpeachable. The other members of the group are similarly stellar figures in the Scottish legal firmament. I don't really think people are going to get very far if they try to traduce the reputation of a group of people who would generally be regarded as a stellar group, a collection of four people of whose views carry across a range, but each one of whom is an acknowledged expert in Scottish judicial process.
Well, First Minister, if we're talking about traducing the reputation of judges, can I ask you to comment on Lord McCluskey's comments specifically about Kenny MacAskill's response to the Supreme Court ruling, in which he said Kenny MacAskill ought to be ashamed of his comments?
Well, yes, and if the Scottish Government and if I as First Minister only appointed people who always agreed with us, then no doubt the BBC would criticise us for appointing yes people. We don't appoint yes people. We appoint people to this vital group, which is designed, incidentally, to help us shed some light on an issue, as opposed and take some of the heat out of it, because the issues involved are of fundamentally more importance than who said what about whom at any stage in time. This is to take us forward and consider as a country some vital things that need to be understood about the integrity of our criminal justice system. And in doing that, I can think of no better people to ask than John McCluskey, that Sir Gerald Gordon, who wrote the book, incidentally, quite literally, on Scottish criminal judicial process, the Professor of Constitutional Law at Edinburgh University, and Charles Stoddart, a very highly respected author, but also a retired principal sheriff. Now, that is a group of people designed, of unimpeachable integrity, people designed to give us some light on an issue so that the Parliament can debate it and we can move forward protecting the integrity of our criminal justice system.
Well, when we look to that, First Minister, and given how important you say this issue is, can we look at some of the rhetoric around it? We now seem to be in a position where if you don't like a court judgment, you personally attack one of the judges. If your Justice Secretary's approach to the law is that whoever pays the court calls the tune, these are deeply disturbing remarks and attitudes to anyone whose interest is the authority of the court and the integrity of the justice system. Whatever the merits of your arguments, do you now regret some of the language used?
Well, I'm not certain when I'm meant to have personally attacked one of the judges. I mean, I think that's... I'm not aware of doing so.
You spoke about Lord Hope's law.
Well, I was pointing out that you shouldn't get into a position in a legal system where, for example, the view of, in some cases, 7 High Court judges in the Court of Session can be effectively and could be effectively overturned by the rulings of one judge. Now, that seems to me a very fair point to make. But listen, last Tuesday, the Cabinet decided that we would go forward by appointing an expert group of people to examine the issue in the cold cool of the evening and come forward with recommendations and proposals for the Scottish Parliament to debate. Why do we do that? Because, look, we're at a time when there's, for the first time in a generation, there is a rising public confidence in our judicial system. The fear of crime is falling because we're at a 30-year low in crime. Because there's police in the streets, the clear-up rates are high because we're taking tens of millions of pounds off bad people under proceeds of crime and giving it to good people across Scotland. You know, I don't want to see that extraordinary progress sacrificed and jeopardised because inadvertently we've created a threat to the integrity of the centuries-old criminal justice system of Scotland. Now, in order to try and move us forward, I've appointed 4 people who are not yes people, who haven't always agreed with the government, don't necessarily agree with Alex Salmond, but nonetheless are people whose opinion will be respected and who can give the Scottish Parliament a means of debate and, more importantly, Scotland a means of moving forward.
First Minister, can we be clear, do you support the idea of withdrawing funding from the Supreme Court?
Well, can I just point out that story when it appeared last Wednesday in the Herald was already a week old. The newspaper held it for no doubt journalistic or perhaps mischievous reasons. What I support is moving forward, having appointed a stellar group of legal minds moving forward on the proposals that they produce for debate in the Scottish Parliament. No, I've already answered your question. I'm not going to go back.
Well, First Minister, it's a perfectly legitimate question, given the civil cases which still go through the Supreme Court. So it's just a very simple yes or no. Do you at this point support withdrawing funding from the Supreme Court, or was Kenny MacAskill wrong to say that?
And I've already pointed out to you that the newspaper report and what Kenny said was already a week old and taken out of context. But Isabel, I'm in an outside broadcast here in Aberdeenshire. It means there's a delay in you asking the question before I'm able to answer it. I put the remarks that were attributed to the Justice Secretary in context. And I'm also trying to say that last Tuesday, the Cabinet decided to go forward quite deliberately because we're trying to find a way to improve the situation. We're trying to shed light on this issue, not just heat. And that's why I've appointed this group of people to bring forward proposals for democratic debate in the Scottish Parliament, and then I hope implementation in the Scotland Bill.
But First Minister, I absolutely understand about the delay can be slightly disconcerting, but just in very simple terms, a very simple question, do you personally support withdrawing funding from the Supreme Court, either permanently or as an interim measure until this panel makes its judgment?
No, I'm supporting going forward in the panel. And can I just say slowly that I've already put the remarks attributed to the Justice Secretary in the context, which has not always been clear from the reporting of them. And I've also told you that's why last Tuesday the Scottish Cabinet decided to go forward by appointing the expert group. Now, we have 4 stellar legal minds. Nobody seriously is going to doubt either their integrity or their expertise. We'll move forward on the proposals that they make. That'll be debated in a democratic parliament, and I hope it can be implemented to protect the centuries-old integrity of the Scottish criminal legal system, compliant with human rights certainly, but having a legal system which we proudly and rightly can say serves the interests of the people of Scotland. And if we manage to do that, and if we manage to undo what is a very dangerous situation that's been allowed to inadvertently develop, then surely that, Isabel, will be more important than who said what about whom several weeks ago.
Well, and First Minister, if we do look to the future in a situation where the appeals go straight to Strasbourg, not via the Supreme Court, given the political rhetoric of the past week, should we expect a situation where, for example, Strasbourg says that trial wasn't fair, you say, too bad, I don't agree with the judges, and it all ends up in some sort of legal limbo? What sort of human rights jurisprudence is that for Scotland?
Well, you're quite right, I think, somewhere in that question to suggest there is a difference between the Strasbourg Court, as it affects 47 jurisdictions, and the Supreme Court, which de facto seems to be appearing as our next court of appeal. But incidentally, the Scottish record in front of Strasbourg is actually a very good one. You'll know in February, for example, the Thomas Judge case was brought before Strasbourg. Many people, incidentally, were very pessimistic about Scotland's chances. But in fact, the Strasbourg court upheld the jury system of Scotland, which is not like any other in Europe, incidentally, but nonetheless is a proper judicial democratic jury system, and also crucially upheld victims' human rights That is the right of victims in assault cases not to have their character unfairly examined before a court. Now, there were some people in Scotland who were pessimistic, but we found when we argued that case directly in front of the Strasbourg court, the Strasbourg court found in favour of the proper basis of the criminal law system.
Right, First Minister, I'm not asking you about the cases that you like and approve of. I'm asking you about the cases where you don't like the judgment. Are we to assume that given Strasbourg cannot, as you have said, open prison doors, that we go into some sort of legal limbo if you don't like the way the judgment goes?
Well, I only mentioned the Thomas Judge case, Isabel, because I wasn't certain. And somewhere in your question you seem to have the assumption that Strasbourg would find against Scots law. I actually think the Scots law legal system is well balanced. Like any legal system, it shouldn't be immune for criticism. There is a big difference, of course, in a Strasbourg ruling, that what happens with a Strasbourg ruling, not that cell doors are flung open and convictions are quashed, but a legal system gets time and opportunity to reconcile its processes with the observations of the Strasbourg court. That is what applies to 47 other jurisdictions across Europe. I believe that we should have that applied to us as well, but on an equal basis with every other criminal justice system. That is at the core of my concern about this, and at the core of what the public should be concerned about is with so much improving in the Scottish judicial system, we do not want to create uncertainty and lack of finality, which could seriously undermine public confidence unless we come forward with proposals to avert that happening. Hence the stellar group of 4 experts who will help we as a country and we as a parliament to do something positive and productive about it.
First Minister, thank you very much indeed.
A great pleasure, thank you.